So this afternoon, we have on the agenda a few times listed out. I think we're going to be pretty liberal with how we interpret that. So we might finish a little bit early and get to a hands-on session sooner than scheduled, and then maybe adjourn a bit early. It's been a packed 2 days. So we'll go through leisurely, and as in the other sessions, please interrupt anytime you have a question. This continue to be a good conversation, picking up on this morning's conversation. So again, Jason Oliveira, product manager and user experience architect here at Synthicity, and joining is Tanvi Maheshwari, who is an urban designer who joined our team fairly recently, and she's been doing a lot of work developing the more site level and district level use cases and giving us great feedback on how we can apply UrbanCanvas and develop the tool for those particular use cases. So we're going to be bridging back and forth between planning work that we were talking about this morning and starting to get into a bit more of the details, both details of the site level and details of how the application works. So just to dive right in, this is what we're going to look at this afternoon. A little bit more about exploring data in UrbanCanvas, how we can use the tool to edit data, and then a lot more about our development type idea and how that can be used to develop prototypes, what the interface actually looks like in the software and what that suggests for how you can use it. A little more details about the analytical tools that we've started to bring into UrbanCanvas, as well as the content creation tool, so drawing geometry and painting attributes on that geometry. Then using these things together to create proposals and development projects, which we've touched on quite a bit in the UrbanSim context, and then again, what collaboration looks like. So just dive right in. So this is actually our GeoCanvas product, and I just wanted to make note for those of you who might have tried it. I think Connor mentioned this, that everything that's in GeoCanvas, which is the ability to import geometric data from shapefiles or Postgres, and then add attributes to that. That is all completely part of UrbanCanvas as well, so we build upon that. And here we're showing, I think these are census blocks with the number of housing units as the factor for the extrusion. As the Bay Area, now we're in Paris, and we're doing, I think, building footprints here to the number of stories. But 3D model of Paris at a massing level in a few clicks is a pretty fun thing. So all this is available in UrbanCanvas as well. So the basic structure in the application, to distinguish it between GeoCanvas and to explain a little more about how the data works in the application, is the data schema that Connor showed this morning in depth, parcels, building, zoning, development projects. Those are what we are referring to as built-in layers, and those are the layers of data that are in tables in the shared repository on our server. In addition to that, as you're using the application, you might have reference layers that indicate the boundaries of municipalities or study areas or whatever polygon geography that you have in another format. You can import those as reference layers. Those are not saved back to the central repository. Those are more as like a tracing paper layer over your real base data. So it's pretty flexible in that way, and we've been looking at having additional flexibility to save those layers, but right now the model is there's core layers which are shared and built in, and then reference layers which are more temporary. Same goes for attributes that you add to layers. There's the fields that are stored in the shared Postgres tables on the server, and those are what are shown in the tables that Connor showed earlier, and then just very roughly shown here. We have the geometry and the primary attributes for the parcels, buildings. We have zoning attributes, and then the development projects. You can join additional attributes that are saved in a variety of file formats, either CSV or NPZ, which are NumPy files. So if you're using the analytical tools that we talked about yesterday for data analysis and you're using Pandana and Python, this is kind of the native file format for that data. So we can join that to the shapes that are built in. But again, those are within a working session and more for reference. So, seen this a few times, but just to show again, we're exploring data at a regional scale. As we zoom in, we are seeing more layers appear. If you've played with GeoCanvas, you know that for the layers that you import, you can control at what point the different parcels and building data appear. We're going to reintegrate that into UrbanCanvas as well, so you have more manual control. If you have a faster computer, you might want to see more further out. Right now, it's pretty much hard-coded in there. But you can still see quite a lot of data at different scales as you zoom in and out. I'm going to let Tanvi take over a little bit, and she's going to walk through a lot of these videos that she's put together to explain the features.
So in this video, I kind of played around with what you can do graphically with Canvas. And so, as you see, there are two base map layers, and I just turned on the second base map layer. There are different types of okay, so go forward a little bit. So you start exploring the data in 3D, and here you turned on one of the base maps, and that's the street map. So there are different kinds of base maps that you can use, toner, terrain, watercolor. You saw the options there. And then play around with the opacity of the base maps, so you can see two layers at the same time. So probably maybe you want to see labels and the terrain together. You can change the color of the building, and here I've colored the buildings by parcels. So they reflect the parcel color, which is in turn the color of the zoning that we specified. And now playing around with the opacity of the buildings themselves. So ghosted sort of building rendering. The parcels can also be colored by other indicators, and here I've picked parcel colored by acres. And when we see a uniform color here, probably because the intervals are too large, too wide. So let's narrow it down. So we use logarithmic breaks here, and I've given a base of 5. And now suddenly, as I apply it, I see more variation in color. So these are parcels colored by the number of acres in these parcels. And the buildings also now are colored by the acreage. So the buildings adopt the color of the parcel here. We can also color buildings by any constant color we like to choose, any uniform color. So let's say I pick a color from this color picker, and let's say I pick black. So all the buildings are colored black now, and I can turn off the other layers, all of them. And then when I view a plan view, what I see is a bigger ground map of the site. So in this way, there are many different types of imagery that we can produce by playing around with these features we have in UrbanCanvas. And
yeah, and I just wanted to point out that we're intentionally showing a simpler view of the data too. Back to Axel's point, sometimes the additional information that you have the power to show can be distracting, and sometimes you just want a simple diagram of open space versus built form. Just a very standard urban planning and design type of graphic. And by clever use of the visualization tools, you can go back and forth between the most abstract two-dimensional view to the level of detail that you need for your project.
And then how we view our data would also help us to correct the data. So we can use visuals to edit and correct data. And oops. So here I'm looking at a bunch of parcels. These are all in New York. And I decide to view, apply a filter to the table that you see at the bottom. It's a parcel table. And I want to view all the parcels that are vacant. So I apply the filter, and I suddenly see all the parcels that belong to zoning category vacant. And I could just browse through it, and I notice a discrepancy where the development type applied is retail and residential, which is clearly not possible in a vacant parcel. So I change the development type. I can make edits within the table, and so I can fix these errors by eyeballing it quickly. Another way to I'll show another example with the buildings table, using filtering and sorting in the buildings table to make edits. So let's open the building table here. and I apply a filter, which is the year the building was built in. And let's say I want to see old buildings which were built prior to the year 1900. So anything that's less than 1900. And so all the buildings are listed. And now I sort them by the number of stories. So I see the tallest buildings that are built before 1900 first, and I probably have picked this one, let's say. And now I can also view this building in 3D or within my site. I can select zoom to select it, select the building in the table, and I'm taken to the building in the site. So here we see the building. And now I can play around with it if I want to change certain attributes or I want to comment on it. So here I commented that this is a tall building, which is pretty old, so maybe you want to check for earthquake safety. And so I leave this comment behind for anyone who's going to work on this parcel later. So that's one way to correct errors or leave comments behind and edit your data. Another way to do it is just by browsing through your region and eyeballing it. So things like, is your zoning data correct? Are the heights that you entered correct? Those are things that you can view in 3D by quickly browsing through your site. So let's look at this region. So I look at it in 3D, and can you spot any discrepancy around here? There's a one spot towards the right. It's turned on. Hello?
Let's try this one. Maybe the better way.
So there's a spot there towards the right, and when you saw this parcel, this building which clearly looks out of place where it is. So we show selection only, which means we select the building, and that's the attributes that you see. You see it's 44 stories with 4 residential units, which is clearly an error. So I would change the number of stories. And maybe you can also leave a comment that I made this change, and then somebody else who looks at it can later edit in other tables or other databases.
Yep. Okay, so there's kind of fundamental data review and attribute editing. Shouldn't be that unexpected if you've used other GIS systems. We have a new innovation that we want to talk about in a little more detail is this approach of developing 3D models in a prototypical way. And we talked a bit about this morning, and just to reiterate that the reasons we went with this approach is to address the difficulty of creating 3D models for a citywide scale when you don't have a lot of good information. So oftentimes, all you need is a low detail contextual model and a rapid way to produce that so that you can focus your energy on the sites that you're developing on or exploring different options for. It also addresses the issue that if you generate your 3D models from data, they're always going to be in sync if you're using a live database system where the models are regenerated as the data changes. So this starts to address the concern that when you have a 3D model that is crafted manually, often that can get out of sync with the data that you're using to analyze that model. So, in the instance of you're doing massing studies and you want to calculate how much area of a bunch of different uses is in a building, very common workflow. If you change the data, model doesn't change and vice versa. So by keeping them coordinated, you can get through this iterative early prototyping phase much more quickly. So how do we do it? We basically use this typological approach, and we create a development type and apply it to sites. And depending on the specific workflow that we're doing, we'll use a development type in different ways. And we'll go into the details here. So what we're showing here is our first view of the development type editor. And I try to zoom in a little bit, but maybe I'll just leave it like this. The basic idea is that the development type is a recipe. So the ingredient that you start with when you're working with a development type is a two-dimensional geometry on the surface of your map. So the two typical geometries to use as the starting ingredient are the parcel or the building footprint. So in this particular visualization, we're using the building footprint as a starting point. And we have this 2D geometry, and we want to make houses that have a pitched roof so that we can get a quick impression that this is a residential area just by flying over it. So what do? We are using a series of steps in the recipe. The first step is a split node, and I'm realizing here that there is not a correspondence between the recipe on the left and what we cooked in the oven on the right. But I can still explain the concept here. So the idea is each gray box on the left is an operation on the shape. So if you want to split a geometry into parts, you click on the scissor icon, and what is produced is a series of additional gray boxes beneath that represent each of the shapes that resulted from cutting up the first shape. So split is one operation, coloring is another one. So if we want to do nothing but just apply a grass material to a site, we can do that. If we want to apply a parking lot texture or an agricultural texture, we can do that. Another operation, so we have split, color, extrude. So this arrow on the left here is what takes the two-dimensional shape and actually creates a three-dimensional volume out of that shape. And we treat that as a building mass. So the up arrow extrudes the 2D shape into a building mass and results in two nodes beneath that. So each of these lines or steps in the recipe, we term a node. And after you create a 3D shape out of a 2D shape, you have two nodes, the facade and the roof. And this is just a very quick way to do this kind of massing model. So we at the current time have pretty constrained functionality in the graphic editor, but it's sitting on top of a very powerful underlying system that with some degree of focus and training, you can type in more specific and flexible recipe. But what we're actively working on is exposing as much of that power as we can in the graphical interface. So you don't have to remember what the different options are. You can just click from a set of choices. So what we've done here is we've chosen a watercolor cartoonish facade to go with our watercolor cartoonish background so that people don't get too wrapped up in the details. And we've applied a schematic roof shape and decided that this is going to be a hipped roof, so it's sloped on all four sides. The nice thing about this is all we've said and encoded in this recipe is make a building that's the number of stories that this building record has and give it a hipped roof. We haven't said anything about how long each side is, how many meters or feet high the building is. All we've said is refer back to the building table and put this kind of roof. So this same set of steps can be applied to every single building footprint that we want to look like this. And the building geometry, the footprint geometry, or the number of stories could change, and if it still has the same rules applied, the model changes automatically. What's nice about this is that if we start doing variations where we try different buildings on the same site, and the building's inheriting its template from the site, all we have to do is redraw the building footprint, and you get a new model. So this allows you to rapidly look at different configurations. So I mentioned earlier we can use development types for different purposes. One is the one I've mentioned at length, is that we don't have specific geometry for a building footprint. You can kind of extract or construct a footprint from the parcel. So the first thing you would do in that kind of situation is apply setbacks to the parcel geometry. So if we wanted to assume that a building is going to be built out completely to the allowed boundaries of the site, taking into account setbacks, first thing we do is we say, okay, look at the zoning table, respect front, side, and rear setbacks, and then what's left is what gets extruded into the building. So that's generating building footprints from parcels when the footprint data isn't available. And one of those cases when it's not available is when you're doing future proposals and you're basically looking at, well, maybe the quantity of interest is the setback. So maybe we want to study if changing the front setback on lots in a downtown area, say we want to regulate open space on the front or sides of buildings. What effect is that going to have on capacity for office or residential use? So we could have a development type where we adjust the front setback and the building is going to automatically change in response to that parameter everywhere it's at. So one point of control, and I can see the effects everywhere. The use of development types is just for visual appearance. If we want to have an abstract building versus a detailed building, we might just want a box. That's a white blob. We call those sugar cubes when we're playing with this. You might want a sugar cube, or you might want a highly detailed building. The development type change is a way to affect the visual appearance. We can get more detailed and create special building forms. The setbacks don't just apply to the ground level. You can also use the same operation to generate podium buildings or courtyard buildings to say, around the perimeter of the site we want buildings, but in the middle we want just a flat lot. So in that case, we're extruding around the perimeter and not extruding in the middle, and then in the reverse we could say second floor and up, have a tower, and on the ground floor take up the entire site. And then lastly, which we'll talk about in more detail, is the development type encodes use information and eventually any other, we'll call them tags, which is just an attribute that's associated to geometry. So if you want to measure how much wall area there is or roof area, you associate that with a tag, and then you can then do area takeoffs based on the attribute that you tag to that geometry. So that's a lot of words talking about visual things, so we're going to show some more videos to demonstrate this.
Next question. Next question.
Yes?
Mm-hmm. So it's the development type, the composite development on the smartphone and building, affect the 3D model or development type on the building highest priority.
So I'll explain how it works now and then how we want it to work. The first pass that we've taken at this is you basically are applying everything to it's an elaborate series of rules, which is why I'm hesitating, but essentially you're only going to visualize a development type on one starting shape. So if a parcel has no building footprint associated with it, we'll use the parcel geometry as the start shape. If there is a building footprint, we won't use the parcel geometry, we'll use the building footprint geometry. What we want to do is provide control to the user to determine which one is used, and we just haven't gotten there yet. So there's a whole bunch of in-between cases where you might want to first generate a building footprint using the parcel geometry, and then apply a separate development type to that building to get the building style. So I think the ideal situation, which we're moving to, is you have site development types that subdivide the land of the parcel into parts, and then building development types, which turn a footprint geometry into a building. That makes it a little conceptually clearer to say that building development types always start with extrusions and turn something into a building, and parcel development types don't really make sense applied to a building footprint, because you're not going to apply zoning setbacks to an L-shaped footprint, because it doesn't make any conceptual sense in the real world. So, complicated answer to a very good question. So, I think when you're using UrbanCanvas now, it becomes intuitive pretty quickly once you start using it, because if you apply the wrong kind of development type to the wrong geometry, you can see it. So, we'll see examples of both.
Yeah, we have a couple of videos to show each of the 4 types of development types. So the first one is when we use the parcel geometry as the starting shape when we don't have building footprints available. Okay. So here we add a new development type. We click on the plus symbol, and then we can give it any name that we remember. Here I'm calling it house with setbacks, and I'm saving it. And then I apply it to this parcel, and so from a drop-down list, I can select it. Now we see a flat green shape because we've not yet decided the recipe of this development type. And we start with what you see on the left, landscape, which is green in color with no texture. Now I start working on the recipe for this development type. I split the base, and I use the front, rear, and side setback values from the building, from the zoning table. So those 4 boxes are checked. And this, let me explain the idea of splitting. Okay. So when you split any shape, it is split into 5 resultant surfaces, the front, the back, and sides, and then an inner shape. So then you can choose to work of either of these 5 shapes. So I would assume here that the center, the inner shape is the building. So again, when we apply the split, can I play the video?
Yeah.
Okay, again, so I define this new development type, I give it a name, and go ahead. The green shape appears, and then I apply the split function, and I see it split into 5 resultant surfaces. And then I can choose which surface I want to work with. The front one comes from the front setback, the rear from the rear setback, and the sides from side setback I use in the table. And the inner shape I then extrude and click on the up arrow. And as I extrude it, I can now apply a roof, which is, here I choose a hip roof for this residential type. And then I can choose any texture I want from this drop-down list. We intend to have swatches, visual swatches for you to select from sometime later, but right now we have a drop-down list. We add any objects. Here again, this is, like I said, there's a front shape that's split up as you split front, rear, and side. And maybe I want to have a yard or a small front yard in this shape. So I pick the front value, a front shape, and I add an object to it. And here I've added a tree. I select the tree, I give it the shape and size I want. I select the number of trees, and the video stops. Yeah.
How does it know what front is? What do you mean by front?
We
Yeah.
will show you that.
Always
So the front is
largest.
the front is selected automatically, mostly by UrbanCanvas, but you can also manually assign a frontage. So here, when I assign the front, the trees in front, you see the trees appear in the front that UrbanCanvas picked up automatically. But then I right-click on it and say I want to manually select a frontage. Especially on corner sites, you might need to do this more often when you need to know what your frontage is. So here, when I select the new frontage, the front appears in the direction I just selected.
So by default, is it picking the longest or the most north, or?
So the way the algorithm works is on sites where you have edges that are shared with other parcels, you can detect the one edge that is not shared with other parcels. So it's generally a block where you have it split longitudinally. The shared edges will be not front. That leaves one on the long edges that is the front. The reverse of that is called the rear. And then on the corners, it's kind of indeterminate, so you have to go in and manually edit it.
Is there a way that maybe like you can incorporate the streets, so streets kind of become like your own polygon that you can say, you know, the edges that are adjacent
Yes.
to the street? Okay.
You can do that. You can't do it in UrbanCanvas yet, but that's how we want to do it, because that's the most determinate way to do it. So that comes back to the automatic parcel subdivision feature we were showing earlier. These things kind of all go hand in hand. So like once you have the street network, you can use that to divide the ground surface into blocks, and then the blocks into parcels with the automatic parcel subdivision we were showing earlier. And then you'll have enough information to generate frontage using some rule like the longest unshared edge will be the front. So you'll have to do a lot less manual work to do this. You don't have to do it on a site-by-site basis, though. I mean, we've designed the tool so that if you have a grid of streets, you can select many blocks at once and just assign frontage on those edges. So it's actually a less tedious process. You only have to do it once.
The next thing is about the development type that's applied to a building footprint when you have footprints available, and then how you can use it to edit the visual appearance of those building types. So we look at this parcel with these existing building footprints available, extruded to the height. And I create the new type called retail and residential. So let's assume it's a mixed-use development type, retail on the ground floor and residential above. I extrude the base shape, which is the building shape, and I extrude it to a single story. So I remove the, it can be extruded to the building height as per the building table or a manual value that you enter. So I enter one story and I assign the use retail to it. And now I'm playing around with the colors here, giving it a texture and color. The color value, colors can be assigned as a range of values of hue, saturation, and values. So you can, within this development type, we can have a variety of colors for that development type. And so you can see what the interface looks like here for the HSV values. And so I save this development type. So that's the recipe which I'll now apply to this parcel. I right-click on it and I select it from the drop-down menu. And this is what the building would look like based on the recipe I just created. So what you see now is a building with retail on the ground floor, residential above, and a certain texture applied that I picked up from a drop-down menu with a certain level of detail.
Yeah, it's very subtle in this drawing, but you can see there's a difference in the texture pattern on the first floor there.
And so in the next video, I guess it's the next one. In the next video, we'll see the utility of the retail and residential tag or use that I just applied. So, so this one is, can I pause it? Yeah. This is another way to look at the building form where we talked about creating different types of building forms using the development type. So here I'm trying to create a building where the retail is, the residential above the retail is set back from the retail. So I give an upper level terrace or create a podium below.
Let's do it this way.
So again, I split the upper surface. I extrude it to a single story, the retail. And then the roof of the retail I split, and I give the front, rear, and side setback values as 1 meter. So that's the setback that will be applied to the upper level housing. And then I give the textures and colors as I desire. And these are the HSV ranges that I provide. And as I save it, I'll instantly see the results on the parcel I applied it to, and you see a meter setback on the upper levels here.
So we're applying these to footprints that happen to come from the base data. I mean, it's an unrealistic use case that you're going to be editing existing buildings, but this is more of as a placeholder to say, you can draw building footprints manually, which we'll show. And then you're going to use a combination of these setback rules and extrusions with manual drawing if you want to get down to this detail level. So if these buildings look familiar to you for some reason, if you happen to know New York very well, the use case is designing new buildings generally or changing the visual appearance of old ones. We're probably not going to be changing the massing of existing buildings very frequently.
So using these simple split, extrude, and texture tools, you can create a whole variety of building types in this development type editor. You can create buildings with vertical shading and awnings and podiums and so on, balconies even. And now I'm trying to analyze the tags. What I've done here is color the building by tag. Tag is the use that we assign to the building when we're creating the development type. And here I gave retail on the ground floor and residential above, and then a layer of landscape in between where I set back the building. And you can see the three colors here: red for retail, yellow for residential, and green for landscape. And so this is how you can view the building by use, which is our tag. And you can also analyze the building by use by selecting the individual buildings that you want to analyze. I'll show you one use case of a project, made-up project that I was working on as an urban designer. So one of the things somebody mentioned was about how planners shy away from 3D, working in 3D. I know that designers and architects particularly shy away from analytics, and this is one tool that I particularly enjoyed working with in UrbanCanvas, the instant analytical feedback. So let's say we have a park here, and then we have a block to develop near the park. And I would like the park edge to be very active. So I have lined up the whole street on the ground floor with retails and cafes, and I want to create an active park edge. So as you can see, so I have a mix of residential, office, and retail, and some community services. But on the ground floor, all along, I'd like sort of cafes, and I have this image of what the edge of the park should be like. But I have certain restrictions. I am asked that I need to create at least 50,000 square meters of office space and residential space. And in order to avoid over-designing retail, I cannot design more than 5% of the footprint, total design footprint as retail space. So I'm working with those constraints. So I look at my design that I've created, and I begin to analyze it. So then I select. Is it playing? So the problem is when you pause the video. Okay. So as you can see, I've lined up the ground floor with retail, which is colored in red. And the next thing to do is just select the buildings that need to be analyzed. All these buildings are part of one proposal. So that is why you can see only these buildings and not the context. And when I select it, on the left, you see the area takeoffs. So I have way too much retail, about 15%, and I have less residential footprint than I require. So I need to go back and revisit my design. Surely I cannot have retail all along the park edge, so I need to make some compromises. Probably a cluster of retail in certain parts of the complex would work better as a design for me. So I rework the development types. I use the painting tool on the left here. I pick the parcel as a field, and I pick pure residential as my development type, and I start painting over the residential plus retail type that I created before, and I make it purely residential. So that probably I'll create a cluster of retail on the southern edge of the site, and the rest of it I'll create a mix of offices and residential. So what I would do with office retail type, I'll change it to completely office type. And now when I go back, let's see if this works. Yeah, I've met my targets for residential and office, and I do have roughly 5% of retail space. So this is a quick analysis that I did. This doesn't necessarily have, this is not going to be a final design, but it tells me quickly what is possible for me. How much retail can I design in this area? What is the massing of housing and office required for me? And it gives me this quick feedback, so I can take this back on the drawing table, read and create many reiterations of the design to reach something more realistic.
Right, and I think there's two sides to that example. One is if you're actually the responsible party for generating the build-out, or if you're the party who's responsible for creating the rules in the form of land use code. If you can do that kind of build-out analysis to say, what would it mean if we actually required retail on the ground floor of all these buildings? What percentage is that? Maybe that's an easy thing to calculate in this particular example, but there's going to be other sites where it's not so easy. So having the ability just to do that first cut at what kind of capacity does that result in scenario A versus scenario B. So, we were showing area takeoffs, and we were assigning space use to parts of the building. We see this as the first step to a much more flexible analytical system where we can apply other attributes at a sub-building level. So if we want to say, rather than tagging with use, we could tag with energy consumption. Maybe we can derive that from use, but that might be the kind of thing that we could directly assign as a high energy use intensity to certain buildings versus others. We might want to assign water harvesting potential coefficients and then use a combination of those coefficients and the area takeoffs that we gather from our area takeoffs as a way of measuring impacts on stormwater systems. Or we might want to reduce heat island effect. So we look at heat absorption and light reflectivity and open space. So you can imagine that if you have a general tool that says some sub-portion of a parcel or a building has a certain attribute, and you can calculate the area of that sub-portion of the parcel or building, you can then do more sophisticated analysis. So,
and not just horizontal surfaces, but vertical surfaces
right.
also that can be measured. So then the issues of light reflectivity or construction materials, you can assign tags by construction materials you're using and in the end get an inventory of that. So using just area as a basic unit, we can apply many different attributes and do various kinds of analysis.
The use case that's come up several times and that we've started exploring in much more depth is a more detailed pro forma analysis, so financial feasibility. Having the ability to do this more geometrically grounded analysis will be very helpful. So if we want to do square foot takeoffs on one level on horizontal surfaces, but also vertical surface takeoffs for construction material quantities, you assign that a relationship to a cost table, and then you can connect that to the kind of analysis that Fletcher was talking about yesterday, except rather than using kind of a gross assumption for a site, you're actually deriving the core metrics for that analysis from the geometry that you're generating. So you get a full connection from development type, establishing a prototype of a building form that's connected to materials and energy and water use. And then you can start to look at multiple impacts with one model because you've embedded a lot of information in that model. So it's BIM at an urban scale with really easy aggregation. That's where we're going.
Now, very simple tools of how do we create new building footprints, how we edit the existing building footprints, just for certain examples to show you how that works. So I'm creating these building footprints. They snap, the lines snap at a right angle. You see it going green. You can also see the lengths at which, that you're drawing. There's a status bar below that shows you both in feet and inches and meters the distances.
So I mean, this is first pass at drawing tools integrated into UrbanCanvas. So for this level of analysis, it's pretty much the fundamental drawing tool features. Where we're going with this is after you draw something, be able to edit vertices and move geometry around. So hopefully removing one of those loops out of UrbanCanvas into another application. And this is an area for more exploration for us. So both direct editing and then even potentially importing geometry. If you have a set of building footprints from a developer and you want to visualize those, you can start to use that kind of feature. So right now it's drawing right angles and being able to snap, and we can see a lot of potential for integrated design tools.
And similarly, you can work on drawing parcels in the same manner. You can select parcels, you can delete parcels by just simply right-clicking on it. You can work on the base data as well as create proposals. It's recommended to work in proposal mode so you preserve a copy. And then you can right-click anywhere and draw a new parcel as well. This is one way to do that, but there are other ways that you can do the same thing as well.
The question came up earlier about what do you do in an area where there's no data? This is kind of the atom of that answer is you can just start drawing on the map. We haven't explored many use cases of that yet, but you can imagine the usefulness of having a aerial photo or a street map that is just served to you automatically when you open UrbanCanvas, and then you have a new region, and you can go in and just start parcels and building footprints. And if you're working on a small area, that's feasible. I think these automated we're talking about for subdivision and connecting to the road network, it gets pretty interesting as a way to generate geometry for greenfield development in different contexts. So it's basically having the ability to trace over built-in base maps that I think is really the uniqueness to that tool.
And then making edits to these parcels and buildings, you can individually edit them in the tables, but if you want to make edits over a large area, we can use the paint tool. This is just a demonstration of how the paint tool can help. So if you have certain industrial parcels and I want to change them into mixed-use parcels, and painting zoning over the parcels. Here I've turned on the buildings on the parcel, and now I'm going to start painting on buildings. On the buildings, I can paint the number of stories. And I've decided to paint a range of stories between 2 to 8. Maybe I want to paint a range because I'm not really sure if I have a ballpark idea of what the heights are going to be, but I'm not exact. And so I take the paintbrush, I can adjust the radius to paint over any size of area. And then I paint a range of heights from 2 stories to 8 stories in this proposal. Another way to paint is if mixing building types, development types. So I'm painting on parcels. So you can paint one development type on a parcel or a bunch of parcels, or you can paint a mix of development types. So if you want a mix of visual qualities on a site, somebody asked that before, so we select what are the different types of development types you want. Here you select the ratio in which you want them to be seen, and then paint over the site. So here I have half apartments and 1:1 ratio of other development types, and that's what you see in the visual. And finally, next one. Another way to paint is by picking properties. So you can pick properties from surrounding parcels or buildings and then paint those same properties onto your proposal. I don't know if you would need to do that in your actual workflows, but let's say you want to paint, you want to pick the range of heights of the surrounding buildings. So I see that in the height in the surrounding building is 2 stories and the standard deviation is 1 story. And I pick that and I paint it on my site, and the same range is applied to my site as well. You can paint constant heights, mean, you can also paint a range like I showed before. So here I'm picking a range. The range for the same site is 1 to 6 stories. And now when I apply it to my site, you see this change. And similarly, you can pick development types or zoning and other values and paint it on your site.
So I mean, really, the pick tool is like the eyedropper in other applications where you're sampling data. If you just want to pick and sample one value, it's pretty clear why that might be useful to transfer something on a new proposal from the surrounding context, either for the visual style or the mix of attributes in that building. It's also just a way to sample an area. So if you want to know what the range is in an area and what the mean and median is, it's kind of a built-in sampling tool. So it's not just something that's used in conjunction with the paint tool, but it's kind of a first pass at another analytical tool in the toolkit. Okay, so we keep using this term proposals, and we've talked about scenarios. And in an attempt to clarify the terminology, in the sense of the terms that we're using them in UrbanCanvas, a proposal is a change to a parcel or a building, or multiple parcels or a building, in a pretty generic sense. So one proposal could be changing this pink site into a park. One could be changing this pink site into a store. Another proposal could be selecting another group of parcels, aggregating them, and turning them into an apartment building. So it's geometric changes, aggregations and disaggregations, and changes of use or changes of development type. Basically, any modification to parcel and building data. Each proposal can be assigned a time, and then this will determine when it appears when you use the time slider. So if we assign proposal 1, the park, to 2015, with the time sliders in 2014, we'll see the old parcel. 2015, that gets swapped out with the new parcel that has the park on it. And then when we move into a time frame where the proposal 3 apartment building is active, if that's been assigned some date before 2018, that'll appear then. So why do we go through this much detail? Proposals are different than scenarios. Scenarios allow you to combine proposals together, so you can look at different possibilities without having to create new models or manage the data in another way. So a scenario is a snapshot of a potential real future, so you can't have conflicting proposals in a scenario. So in this scenario, we've decided, scenario A is just the park. Scenario B is the park plus the apartment building. And scenario C, because we have 2 different proposals from the same site, we have to pick one or the other. So scenario B puts a store on the corner of the park. And this is the fundamental construct for looking at options in UrbanCanvas is proposals are the kind of atomic units, and scenarios the way that they're combined together. And then the scenario, when you're doing an UrbanSim simulation and you want to use this mechanism to specify scheduled development events, a scenario is basically the encompassing element that lets you choose which proposals are used in your simulation. So let's look at how this looks in UrbanCanvas.
So we're going to create a new proposal here. Let's look at these parcels.
You can only use this to start talking about.
Okay. We zoom into a bunch of parcels near the water's edge here. And to create the proposal, we need to select these parcels. And then click Add. So that's our first proposal, these 2 parcels here. And let's say you want to create a park here. I'm going to call it Test Park, this proposal. You see a bunch of proposal editing tools have appeared on the right, splitting, joining, and deleting, and undoing the last operation. So I'm going to join these 2 proposals using the join tool. So these 2 parcels, sorry. And so these parcels now become one parcel where I apply a park development type, and I regenerate the geometry, and we see the park. So that's one proposal saved. Let's go on the next building, next parcel. Here I'm going to add a new proposal. I'm going to call it Test Office. So we'll create an office building here. I'll edit the building and create a new footprint. Just right click on it to edit, and then create a shape of your choice. This is the same number of stories as the previous building that was before. So I'm going to go to the buildings table and edit the number of stories here. There are other ways to do it, like painting, like I talked about before, but I'm going to use the tables here. And this is a 12-story building with a development type I've applied to give it a moderate level of detail. And I save it. So now I see the park, which came from the 2 joint parcels, and this new building that I created. Finally, the third parcel here, I find, I'll call it mixed use. I find that this parcel is too large for one development and I need to split it. So I use that scissor icon up on the right, and I split the parcel into 2 consequent shapes. So the 2 shapes have 2 buildings, one for each, and the height comes from the existing building table. So I'm going to right click on it again and draw a new footprint. And then go back to the table. Show selection only shows only the parcel that I've selected, and I change the height of the building here. Again, To add a texture, I right-click on it and select a development type of the desired texture I want and regenerate it. So in a similar manner, we can create another building on the adjacent parcel, and now we have a complete proposal with the park, the office, and the mixed-use development. So we see it, and we now see it also in context from all angles. And now the next thing to do is assigning it a time, the fourth dimension that we talked about. So creating timelines. Here you see the dates that are associated with each parcel. So all I need to do is edit those dates. I go into the proposal and change the dates. So first the park, and then I select the office proposal and change the date to 2018. And let's say we expect this large mixed-use development to come up in 2022. So now all of the proposals that we made have disappeared because the base year right now is 2014. To see the proposals again, I have to move the time slider slowly. First, of course, the park will appear. As I cross the year 2018, I'll see the office, and then finally I'll see the mixed-use development. So the time controls what is visible in your viewing in the window at that time. What also controls what's visible is the scenario. So all these parcels, all these proposals are right now in the base scenario. I can add a new scenario in the scenario manager. Just click on add and then give it any name you like. I create scenario A. And as soon as I add a new scenario, it appears in the proposal table. See that a third column has appeared, which is called scenario A. Now I can just assign the appropriate scenario to the appropriate proposal. So let's say the proposals we created now are all a part of scenario A. So all of them together are one development, which is a possibility, first possibility. So again, we see the base here development, and when we select scenario A, we see what we created. And then before this, I had also created another option for the same site, and that's scenario B. So that's another possibility by changing a more fine-grained development for the same parcels. And now we can compare the two. We can compare the two visually. We can also compare the two analytically by using area takeoffs that we talked about before.
And we just want to distinguish, too, in the interface, there is a distinction between scenarios and runs. And basically, both are sets of data that you can visualize in the 3D view. Scenarios are the combinations of proposals that we were just talking about. And then runs are the output data from UrbanSim. So if you're an UrbanSim user, you can essentially think of this as the inputs and outputs from your simulation. So there are kind of options for the set of buildings and parcels that you see in the view. So if you click on scenarios, you see the list of scenarios that you've manually created. And if you see runs, you see runs that have been put in the database through the UrbanSim workflow. I think we've covered development projects in pretty good detail, so we don't need to dwell on this too much. But just one more time to show how that compares to proposals. The development project is just a means to highlight a set of parcels and put on a high-level view of quantity of development without any further detail. So in contrast to the high-level building models that we're just creating, the development projects are the complement to that. So those are basically the same data shown in the two different ways. So kind of a whirlwind. Happy to revisit anything if you want to look at any features again, or start taking just general questions about what can and can't be done and how things work. And back first.
So one
behind Dimitri.
Keep thinking about the connection between the So the example you gave us, like, for example, in 2020, merge three parcels and build an apartment building on top of those 3 per parcel. So how can that be reflected in the UrbanSim third-party simulation? I know the developer model can read that proposal information, view that apartment building in the simulation, UrbanSim simulation. But how that the merge of those 3 parcels gets reflected in UrbanSim?
So is the question in UrbanSim, if you aggregate 3 parcels, how is that reflected in the simulation?
No, you merge 3 parcels in UrbanCanvas.
Yeah.
In 2020, that's the timeline.
Yeah.
So that information will be fed in UrbanSim as a proposal.
Right, and I think Connor is going to take the answer. Yeah.
So, way that it's that all of the UrbanSim scheduling will work. So you know which parcels are being replaced, and you're just inserting a new record into the parcel table that is a combination of new records. So does the old record get deleted then? The old parcel record? They'll from that year forward. That's basically to change that. UrbanCanvas are creating a copy. Basically a copy that's going to merge change that. And does, I guess, for a split, then the opposite would occur. Then still remove the old one, but insert all the replacing one.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially modeled as substitutions of records at a scheduled time in the model.
How does it attribute those records? How does it assign the parcel ID and that kind of stuff? Those kind of attributes. Let's say merging 3 together to 1. Does it create a new parcel ID for those?
So if you're creating an aggregation of parcels in UrbanCanvas, to the extent that you can make an automatic assumption about attributes, I think the way we do it now is we take the land use and development type of the largest of the parcels that you're aggregating and use that, and then things that can't be assumed through the aggregation are left null, and you're left to manually enter those things. So if we were to do anything, we're not doing automated aggregations yet, so there's no need to have logic. Everything's very project by project.
I think that's one of the reasons why we really like to keep the UrbanCanvas, UrbanSim parcel IDs separate from the assessor's parcel number. You always have that sort of legacy parcel number still tied to this subdivided parcels that will go to the aggregate parcels. Just a tougher problem to solve when you're aggregating parcels together to hang on to. We always try to keep track of where the parcels are.
Yeah, and I think this is another area where exposing more control about assumptions that are made when you're doing these automated aggregations or splits would be useful. Yeah.
Is there some way, forgive me if I missed it, to easily compare the differences between 2 scenarios that you painted up, edited through UrbanCanvas? So let's say you make 2 different scenarios, subsequently go and run them through UrbanSim. Is there a nice summary reporting tool for comparison?
No, not yet. The next step that we're taking towards that is introducing the idea of study areas as a geometry. And that has a few uses. If you define a geographic boundary for a study area, and you want to look at a change in area takeoffs from scenario A to scenario B, you can use that geometry as basically the selection mechanism for what you're doing your area takeoffs on. So this is a very simple example of that. If you say everything in these 3 blocks is part of my study area, and you switch between scenario A and B, we're planning on setting up the area takeoffs to say, use the study area as the boundary, so you don't have to go in and manually select the things that you want to measure every time. So that's step one, would be this concept of within what boundary do you want to compare scenarios? Is it the whole region? Maybe your study area is the region. Then being able to do simultaneous reporting on two different scenarios within a boundary. So that's kind of the direction that we're going with that.
So what happens when, with passage of time, the proposal, and you know which proposal got actualized. So how would you make a proposal into your actual data? What's involved in that?
So right now it's a manual process of editing the base year data, but we want to be able to, it's a very small feature, but one that we need to do soon is the ability to basically commit a proposal to the base year. So rather than only referring to that proposal in the simulation on a temporary basis, it would permanently substitute what's in the base year for the parcels that were there originally. So the workflow would go, I have 2014, some parcels. I select them and I make a proposal that says, in 2020, these are going to be aggregated and become an office park. 2020 comes around, it actually happens. It's no longer a proposal, it's something that's real, that was anticipated. You would push the commit proposal button, which is yet to be implemented, and that would replace the original parcels from that date going forward. What we haven't done a lot of thinking about is maintaining legacy data. So base year changes as we move into the future. So right now the base year is 2014. You know, going backwards in time is something that we haven't thought a lot about. So we have a data infrastructure to handle it, and it's all set up so that basically things just come into and out of existence based on when their validity dates are scheduled. So we're set up to handle it pretty well. It's just a matter of exposing it in the interface.
It's not even clear that we need to win the actual data as base year data, because in the end what we have is, I mean, we haven't yet answered this question, but in the end what we have is we can assign or associate proposal to base scenario, which is effectively the base data. And so as you move the time slider, you're effectively slicing the data particular to different snapshots of all of that over time. So maybe that solves the problem of having legacy data as to see the plan future. So you're just moving the time slider to what for which year you're actually using the data. That's the base scenario. So if you're 2020 and that data is assigned to base scenario, then that could eventually be the base scenario. So still, we're still trying to figure out what's the best way for you to do that.
Yeah. I mean, as we're sitting here designing the feature live, one mechanism could just be a simple flag to say this proposal happened, and then later in the future we could just say, all right, if I'm looking at this date, make sure you show me all the proposals that actually happened. We'll leave it at that so we don't get confusing speculating about future features, but it's a need. Any other questions about what we showed?
I'll just make a general comment here. I think a lot of the people in the room right now are regional planners, and I think some of the really detailed examples might not resonate with the workflow that you would be doing in your office. But I think the intention here is that some of the things that we were showing this afternoon were things that your local planner jurisdictions, in your local jurisdictions, would be doing, and that would potentially create a different interaction between you as a regional planner and the local planner. So these kinds of examples are good for thinking about plan development events that are in the pipeline, and there is a fair amount known about them, and for which the kind of really generic development projects visualization and tracking that we showed earlier is just not adequate. You really want a more articulated example or articulated representation of that plan development, down to the building footprints and the layouts and even the uses within buildings. So again, we're trying to support a range of workflows that are not just for regional planners, but also increasingly for local planners to be able to have a kind of collaborative set of interactions that really there's been no good support for in the past.
Right, and we recognize that the amount of flexibility you need once you make that scale jump, depending on what you're doing, could be more features than we currently have, but we don't think we're that far from the threshold. So for to support a lot of additional uses. So this meeting is really helpful for us to say, wow, you guys are this close. If only you had terrain and bay windows, it'd be the most useful thing ever. Or you could tell us, I'm going to use SketchUp until the day I die. So this is kind of information that would be useful to us too.
As a suggestion, I think there would be great value in bringing details on transportation infrastructure into this, so that when consultants do a study, they would not just submit like some schema, but they would actually, let's say, use UrbanCanvas and create different scenario of how they would add lanes or the overpasses or not necessarily land use, but just transportation investment. Because a lot of NPOs are actually handling the transportation side, not on the land use side. Land use side is just goes along. That's not the focus of so if that can be incorporated, I think that would be something we got to consider.
I completely agree.
Do you associate like a Google SketchUp model with a particular building?
Yeah, so we've done that. It's not in the release that we're releasing. Earlier we showed Transamerica Pyramid sitting in downtown San Francisco, obviously not coming from a recipe of any kind. So technology is there. It's just a matter of having an elegant way to manage that on a large scale. So one-off buildings here and there, no problem. There's a certain performance threshold that we just need a way of elegantly managing that, but we can absolutely start to incorporate that.
Jason, if I can just comment on that a little further. I think one of the challenges is that when we think about intermingling procedural buildings and, say, landmark buildings, for visual representation, it's the obvious use cases. If you're doing something in a community meeting, then people are going to feel more affinity to the visualization. They can see some buildings they recognize. So it's mainly for that visual kind of recognition that we're thinking about supporting this use case. On the other side of that coin, though, is that you saw the kind of area takeoffs and analytics and so forth that we were doing based on procedural buildings. It's less clear that if you intermingle landmark buildings that are Google SketchUp origins and so forth, we're going to have exactly the same mechanism to mine the data from those buildings. So it starts to get a little murky when we intermingle what we call static models with procedural models in terms of what kind of data they contain, how we can analyze them, not just to create a visualization, but to do analytics. So that's a bit of an open question how we're going to handle that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the general question of you have machinery to do these things in an automated fashion over a large geographic area, but you still need to craft the details sometimes, and then as soon as you start crafting, you break the machine. So as long as we do it in a way that whether something is assumed or designed or generated, making those things abundantly clear to the audience and the person who's using the tools will be really important.
In terms of loading like a batch of data into this environment, are there tools that UrbanCanvas itself, or is the idea to use like span that?
It's the latter now. I think it's going to be a more useful tool to more people the more it's an import function in the file menu. There's not a mechanism to do it from UrbanCanvas yet, but I could definitely see a lot of value in that. But again, we come back to the data, the question of if we just really open the floodgates for that, you need a mechanism to control that too, so that if you're just importing parcel data, there's a way to say, okay, well, you're going to clobber the data that's here already on that same geographic location. So I think we want to do it. We just have to craft the mechanisms to manage it.
And would the same go for exporting data back out?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. So I mean, we're coming at it from the two sides. One is the visualization side and the management side, and the other is the hardcore data science side, and the directions like this. So ever integrating.
Sorry, one is say but those that is important that once it's in data also can import any image space. You have to do any process. Not only it has the built-in layers,
yeah, so there is that flexibility that we've not explored in context of like real use cases, but we have pretty open-ended backend that connects to Postgres. So Carlos makes a good point that exposing that additional functionality might not be as far off as it might seem.
Now, just to piggyback on that real quick, I think that, I don't know, some of us have kind of entrenched investments in something like ArcSDE, where we have all of our developments and journal plans and parcels and stuff are all being edited in a multi-user environment, versioning and all that kind of stuff. And so, in all likelihood, we're not going to probably be able to jump into something like this right away and actually be doing any editing. We probably would do just visualization within it. So I guess, are there sort of workflows that you guys have envisioned as sort of like a bridge before you can sort of go full headlong into this, so that maybe like a replication process that goes from one environment to the other that's going to keep things up to date? Sorry, I know that's open-ended, but
that exact question is what I was hoping someone would ask, because I think we need to get into the details of what's going to work for you to make that bridge happen, and maybe it's straightforward. I don't know. I think having that be structured and a low barrier to entry so that you can start using UrbanCanvas is high priority.
I think the answer is basically yes. We're going to have to support data translations and taking snapshots and essentially import data from your existing GIS platforms and into UrbanCanvas so you can use it for what it's well designed to support. And then be able to synchronize that. So if you're capturing any sort of feedback from local jurisdictions by UrbanCanvas, there's a way to pull that back into your standard GIS environment.
So we have one more slide for the day. And this is a set of bullet points that are things we're thinking about. We just covered a bunch of them, actually. What direction are we going? What are priorities? I think the big ones we just hit, which are increased integration with our data science toolkit. Part of that is exposing a lot of the UrbanCanvas functionality to Python API, so that if you're in the Pandanus Mendex Python world and you're comfortable with that, being able to hook that up to the visualization engine that we've built is going to be really powerful. So we've just started work on that. We're really excited about the flexibility that will provide as an analytical environment to power users, and also a way for us to accelerate features on our end too. So I think the pace of development is going to be really increasing once we cross that threshold of having an easy to use, flexible Python API.
So just to give a little more in-depth to what that feature will contain.
So imagine that a lot of this functionality that you have seen today for UrbanCanvas, especially when it comes to visualization features, you can have all that your access, and you can control it from Python. So you can create your own scripts. You can access partial data, building data, do computations with all that data, compute indicators, and then make calls to this Python API to visualize the results of those computations at the partial level or at the building level. And later on this report, having transportation networks as part of UrbanCanvas, you can also protocol all of those networks. So it's really providing, it's right now what we envision as the right approach to open UrbanCanvas to people who are comfortable writing Python and programming with Python. And it's the key point to integrate everything you saw today with everything you saw yesterday. So that's definitely one of our key goals at the moment.
And just to spur conversation, I'll keep going down the list. We mentioned the development type editor as a graphical interface to working at a sub-building or sub-parcel level in a template fashion. I think there's a lot of potential power there once we open up some flexibility. We showed those use cases that we thought of, water harvesting, energy use, construction costs. I'm sure there's many more that we've not even conceived of yet, but that's the kind of additional sub-site level analysis that we want to start enabling, and then the subsequent aggregation of that analysis to the city and regional level. The project level pro forma for financial feasibility builds on that. So providing an interface to actually input cost assumptions or connect cost data and do feasibility analysis of these scenarios and proposals that we're developing in UrbanCanvas. More flexible tools for working with proposals, so converting back and forth between development projects at a high level and then the highly articulated proposals to either disaggregate or summarize things, which is going to be really useful. Both sets of tools have purpose, and we want to increase the interoperability between them. I think enhanced permissions, we know this is a big issue. There's restrictions in the data that you're all collecting that comes from a lot of different sources, and we're proposing that there's more eyes potentially seeing this, so the ability to control who can see what, under what context, and do what with it is going to be really important. So we're working on that. Enhanced import and export capabilities we just talked about, both from the point of view of the geometry and data. And we also talked about taking some of the exciting features that we saw in Simulation Explorer and Data Frame Explorer and allowing quick access to summaries about data in UrbanCanvas. So really seemingly simple features like being able to select things and get a summary of attributes of those things outside of the table view, very high up on the next list of features that we're developing, so you can get really quick analytics. Being able to establish a study area, I talked about that already, as a way to define an analysis in a sub-regional way. And then the ability to get your hands on UrbanCanvas without buying a license for us to try it and kick the tires. So there's a lot of stuff that we want to get feedback on and we want you to get excited about. So we're putting the finishing touches on a trial version that will let you do that before you commit to buying a license.
So that's our wish list so far. What else is
Guys, it's for the feasibility or any desire for publishing an analysis as an image service or feature service for web-based review. I don't know the technical limitations, client rendering, performance, and things like that. I know that becomes an issue very quickly in a certain
Yes, we have a lot. We've thought about that a lot, and I think there's a lot of web-based technologies that are really fascinating and powerful that are becoming increasingly powerful on a daily basis. When we started developing UrbanCanvas, you couldn't do much in terms of 3D interactivity in the browser. Now you can do a lot. And there's a lot of interesting territory for exporting views of UrbanCanvas and even, maybe even exposing a lot of that functionality in the browser. So, the same concerns about permissions and data and security apply, but being able to chop out a chunk for consumption by different parties, whether it's the public or just someone you're collaborating with, really exciting. And we've been kicking the tires on a lot of different technologies to enable that.
Jay, I'd actually like to hear a little more about what the envision might be the use case for that. Would it be for public consumption or for local planners? Or
Probably work with the jurisdictions reviewing their plans. So there are varying levels of sophistication of features. And really scaled down. I mean, we don't need fancy building renderings and that. But, just so they can identify features, identify build-outs. I really sort of envision a scenario analysis reporting tool within the plan as I see it coming down the pipe. That we very typically will get from our comments and just ask it through the planning technical review. They'll get maybe 2 or 3 EIR alternatives. And the really most interesting is a few key characteristics. So the visualization element really isn't even so much the major drive. It's the ability for them to hone in on their study area, which would be the jurisdiction. So it might be something that could be really dumbed down, watered down, so that the performance would be more accessible. Why it comes to mind is I just don't see it as very realistic getting all of our jurisdictions to load up a plan. I see that as very, very far out. I mean, we have folks who still like paper maps.
So making it as easy as possible for them to, and as low a barrier of entry, to look at the results without having to learn anything, essentially. We played with that concept a bit in a prototype project we did with San Francisco Planning. It was a site-by-site financial feasibility analysis and zoning analysis where you could essentially have a development type on a single parcel and put a lot more detailed information about costs and revenues and get a bottom line of is this feasible or not. But one of the premises of that was the ability to send a link to someone and have them click on it and basically navigate around a model. So you can imagine that aggregated up to multiple sites. So I mean, we've kicked around ideas about this. We don't have anything specific to share, but I mean, there's a huge amount of potential for that.
So we already do web-based parcel review with our jurisdictions. Pretty much all but one, like commentability. We get thousands of comments just from the planning themselves. It's very similar to what you guys here.
This is something we'll continue looking at as we've been developing web technology and desktop technology. Depending on what the problem is and how much data you need to render and how you need to render it. One trumps the other in different use cases. So we'll continue probably looking at what's the right balance for different workflows to handle in the web and desktop. Scott?
One thing that jumps out at me from this list is just fiscal impact. Probably not that much of an issue on a project basis, but when you sort of scale after a point, kind of get to the question of, well, how's this going to pencil out for the jurisdiction? It's not the rocket science, so it's probably not that hard. The other thing I was wondering, maybe I just kind of missed it, was when we do our land use allocation, we get given from the regional agency employment and population control tools. And then, we sort of work backwards into what that means in terms of, well, actually, backwards and forward. So we we take our pipeline square footage stuff and do some estimates to get to population employment, and then we sort of allocate the delta based on other things. So, if you're actually doing the forecast based on the pro forma analysis, you're forecasting square footage development. And so I'm assuming that you've got some simple translations into employment and population associated with that development. Because otherwise, I'm just kind of wondering, you have to do that offline in order to control totals, population employment. You got to reconcile that at some point.
So this is where the demand side of UrbanSim is the household location choice model and the employment location choice model. And you've got the real estate price model as well. So those are all complementing the pro forma model, which is the developer decisions.
Okay.
So we run all of them together at the regional scale. And if the regional models are using parcel level detail, using your local zoning, your pipeline events, then there's going to be a lot of compatibility right off the bat between the control totals that MTC and APAC allocate to the city and county of San Francisco compared to what you will be producing internally. And you'll have an easier time to go in and tweak things because you're essentially talking the same language at that point.
Right.
But yes, there's definitely a demand side to take into consideration, not just the pro forma on the supply side.
I have a general question about reporting build-out. And the question, a lot of our member agencies are really obsessed with their build-out, when they're going to hit it, what's going to be. They have specific numbers they want to hit, we have to make it happen. And I guess my question is, for some of those, for some of the parcels that have multiple potential projects, that'll actually get determined by the simulation itself, how do you report build-out capacities for those without running the simulation?
So
Do you
I think
report the max of it? Or?
yeah, I mean, I think build out is a different concept than a forecast for a particular time frame. So build out would be a maximum feasible development, where feasible initially is interpreted in terms of the bulking that's possible within the zoning constraints and the use types that are permitted. But then feasible could be reinterpreted to be what's financially feasible, what's feasible within the boundaries of market conditions simulated over a period of time. So you can refine a build-out analysis into a forecast that takes market conditions into account, takes underbuild factors into account, and things such as that. But I would distinguish those things and say build-out is a physical capacity subject to parcels that are there and zoning that's on them, as compared to something that's analyzed in terms of a market context. Other questions? Okay, I think if there are no other questions, what we can do at this point is bring this afternoon's formal presentations to a close. We've gone through a lot of material, and I think we should give Jason and Tanvi and Carlos and everybody else a hand.